The substances, materials, and technologies that we have compiled in this video defy the laws of physics. They exist in spite of them and amaze us with their mere presence. At the same time, they are all very real. As usual, we've hidden the most incredible examples until the very end. Let's start, perhaps, with europium, a metal that belongs to the lanthanide class in the periodic table. They all stand apart because of their unusual properties. But even among them, europium looks like the strangest one. First of all, this element has abnormal chemical reactivity. If you put it in water, it will immediately dissolve. Yet europium doesn't burn at all. It also behaves strangely when exposed to air. After a couple of days, it turns into oxide powder, which turns red in UV light. Because of this, it is used in luminous phosphor powders. Its particles are also added to the fluorescent parts of euro banknotes. And it is because of europium that you see this rich red color on your screens. The next material with absolutely unique properties is pyrolytic graphite. It consists of many layers of graphene, a substance that we described in detail in the previous video. But pyrolytic graphite has completely different properties. It's a perfect diamagnet. That is, it repels the magnet more than all other materials. It doesn't matter which pole it is turned towards. Here is a block of 9 magnets fastened together in a certain sequence, and above this block hovers a plate of pyrolytic graphite. Of course, this levitation effect is achieved if the weight of graphite is small. But if you take a bigger magnet, it will work with a heavier piece of graphite. Pyrolytic graphite has another unusual property. It is the best heat conductor known to mankind. If you take a plate of the material in your hand and try to cut a piece of ice with it, it will immediately react. Under the influence of heat, the ice will begin to melt quickly and split into parts. These materials are called hydrophobes or hydrophobic materials. Look at this square of green liquid. Why does it keep its shape and doesn't go beyond invisible boundaries? The fact is that the surface around the square has been treated with this very hydrophobic material. If a drop of water falls on it, it will take a perfect shape and just roll down. This is the so-called lotus effect. And recently, Russian scientists from the town of Dubna have learned to reproduce this effect on the surface of any material. They have achieved this through the modern technology of colloidal synthesis of nanoparticles. Studies using an atomic force microscope have shown that this hydrophobic nanoroleaf almost completely corresponds to the surface of lotus leaves, which naturally repels water that gets on them. And another group of scientists from the University of Rochester managed to create a hydrophobic material of such quality that water droplets simply bounce off the surface. The peculiarity of this method is that it's not additional processing but the texture of the surface itself that gives the material its water-repellent properties. This means that its actions will not wear off after some time. The application of this material is limitless. Who knows, maybe in a few decades we will have multi-level pools, but it's a different topic. We'll talk about the possibilities of this a little later. And now let's look at the water, and not just any normal kind, but dry water. The name itself can already blow your mind, but the properties of this substance are even more unusual. In the 90s of the last century, dry water was invented by specialists of the company 3M. 3M still exists, now under the trademark Novec. Scientists took the ethyl isopropyl ketone formula and replaced all 12 hydrogen atoms in it with fluorine atoms. The result was a substance unlike anything that humans have encountered so far. Today there are several variations of this substance with different temperatures and densities. The most famous examples, Novec 649 and Novec 1230, have a very high density, which is why their weight significantly exceeds the weight of ordinary water. Other unusual abilities of this liquid include the inability to wet fabric or any other fiber in the same way as plain water. Look what will happen if a napkin is dipped in both plain and dry water. In dry water, it almost doesn't get wet, and the remnants of water will simply drain off it. Also, dry water has a low solvent capacity, hence the name. Dry water is also used in automatic fire extinguishing systems. Next on our list of unusual substances is hot ice. Basically, it is a liquid that becomes solid at the slightest impact. Hot ice or sodium acetate changes from a liquid state to an ice-hard crystal at a single touch. The patterns formed on the surface are similar to those found on windows in winter during frosty weather. When pressed on, a crystallization center is formed, from which information about the new state is transmitted to the molecules as a chain reaction. Naturally, while this substance only looks like ice, it actually feels quite warm to the touch and is actually used to make chemical heating pads. Number 6 on our list is one-way bulletproof glass. Ordinary bulletproof glass has been around for a long time. The main principle of its operation is the retention of bullets and the delay of the shockwave. But such bulletproof glass is useless in combat conditions, when you need not only to defend yourself, but also attack the enemy. As this glass does not let bullets pass from both sides, a group of scientists in the PAS company set out and fixed this problem. The unidirectional bulletproof glass presented by them passes bullets through itself on one side and stops them on the other side. This is achieved by coating the glass with special acrylics. The main thing, of course, is not to confuse the sides during crucial moments. And now, here is a gas that is able to hold solid objects. It is sulfur hexafluoride. If you fill a closed container with it, it will settle to the bottom, because it is heavier than air. And if you put some small object on top of it, for example, a foil boat, it will easily hold it on its surface. And if you let the gas out, the boat will sink to the bottom. Another property of this gas is the ability to reduce the frequency of any sound passing through it. And if you inhale a little sulfur hexafluoride, you will sound like Darth Vader. The 8th place on our list holds an object that fascinated our distant ancestors, a Celtic stone. This thing was known to be of importance to a particular set of ancient Germanic tribes, the Celts, hence the name. Today, archaeologists are finding Celtic stones in various parts of the world. This is a toy in the shape of an ellipse, which is designed in such a way that it can rotate around its axis only in one direction. The Celtic stone doesn't want to spin in the opposite direction at all. This thing violates a number of physical laws, such as the law of conservation of angular momentum. The main secret of the Celtic stone is that the direction of its geometric axes and symmetries doesn't coincide with the direction of the axes of inertia that pass through the center of mass. Now imagine that matter begins to take on forms that you want it to take on. We are already familiar with 3D printing when the printer gives us what we need according to the given parameters. 4D printing allows you to create objects that change their shape or structure under the influence of water, heat, light, or other factors. What happens to a thin strip of wood if it gets wet on one side? It will begin to deform, but these deformations are unpredictable. Specialists from the scientific laboratory of the University of Massachusetts have learned to predict material deformation, or rather to program it, which makes it programmable matter. Scientists give wood the necessary shape by wetting the material in strictly defined places. Here's what it looks like. But researchers don't only work with wood. A number of different programmable materials have already been developed. And now we present you the gomboch. Looking at this plastic figure, you will never guess what unique properties it has. But its unusual shape and composition are the result of solving a unique mathematical problem. Scientists used to be convinced that an object of this shape was simply impossible to create. We all know a tumbler toy that always returns to its original position. This is achieved by putting a load to the bottom and making it empty on top. Two Hungarian scientists Gabor Demakis and Péter Várkonyi decided to find out if it was possible to create such a homogeneous object after all. They succeeded. Gomboch is the world's first example of a three-dimensional convex body with one stable and one unstable equilibrium point, or a monostatic object. Gomboch can be in one and only state of rest. If you turn it upside down, tilt it, put it on the other side, it will always return to its original position. Initially, the existence of such an object was proved theoretically by solving a complex mathematical equation. It took 10 years and a lot of experiments to solve it. For the solution of this problem and for the gadget itself, the creators received many awards. And now, a few bonuses. Remember, in the last video we talked about supercooled rubidium? Actually, it's not a joke. Researchers have achieved the behavior of a substance with a negative effective mass in the rubidium atom. This means that these atoms, under external force, did not fly towards the vector of this force. In the experiment, they behaved as if they were bumping into an invisible wall every time they approached the boundaries of an area with a very small volume. An article about this was published in Physical Review Letters. The negative effective mass is what scientists call, for example, the behavior of holes in semiconductors, with which every user of modern electronics deals. So, since the rubidium atoms were moving in the direction opposite to the vector of the force applied to them, the media all over the world spread the word about the creation of a substance with negative mass, omitting the word effective. Imagine two masses next to each other. Negative mass is attracted by positive, and positive is repelled from negative. Consequently, both masses will experience the same acceleration forces, which violates Newton's third law. Because such a system of two masses will accelerate infinitely. It seems that this is just a silly thought experiment, but in fact, scientists love such puzzles. Not so long ago, the scientific journal, Quanta, published an article entitled "There Are No Laws of Physics." Its author is Robert Dijkgraaf, director of the Institute for Advanced Study, where Einstein spent 22 years of his life. Dr. Dijkgraaf writes about a frighteningly ramified maze of possibilities, an almost endless web of alternate versions of reality with loose correlations. Dr. Dijkgraaf writes, "If our world is but one of many, how do we deal with the alternatives?" The current point of view can be seen as the polar opposite of Einstein's dream of a unique cosmos. In his article, Robert Dijkgraaf writes about string theory. The result of this theory was a maze of mathematical solutions in the amount of 10 to the 500th power, where each solution corresponds to one of the potential universes. One of them is certainly ours, but it's not certain. But why did scientists need such mathematical puzzles? The discovery of the mysterious power of dark energy, which accelerates the expansion of the universe, moving galaxies apart from each other at an ever faster rate. Dark energy has all the signs of a cosmological constant, which Einstein introduced into his equations of the theory of relativity a century ago, but then abandoned it. However, the experimental value of this cosmological constant differs from the theoretical value by 10 to the 60th power. We will talk about dark energy in future videos. Let us know if you are interested by liking and commenting. That's all for today. Thank you for your interest in the topic and helpful comments. See you on Subversion.